Alright, you know what time it is. A little Reikland Fleshade action. And we got to hit all of these bad boys. We want to make sure we get nice coverage. Make sure we shake it up real well. I'm going to go ahead and use a fat brush for this. Like I said, you just want to make sure you're getting nice coverage. So we're just going to grab one of our sprues here with all the shoulder pads on it. And all we're doing is just going through and getting a nice coverage on all of them. And when I first put my brush on, I will take and touch a couple of them and just put like an excessive amount on a few of them, and then I'll come back through and spread it out accordingly. And the idea being that you don't just end up with a bunch of the wash all on one, and then the next ones are getting like relatively less, but you actually use the bristles to make sure the wash gets down in all the recesses. Otherwise, sometimes you'll get little spots where you don't get good coverage. You might get like a little air bubble that stops the wash from going down in there. So we're just going through and basically just doing this over every bit of all the gold. Now, if you were doing it like a little more controlled, less models, more tedious, you could save some wash by only doing the areas you need. But for me, it just makes sense to go through and just get nice coverage on everything, and then we're going to go back through and paint all our details like over top of it, like for instance our silvers and stuff. But for this, we want to just make sure we get nice coverage on everything. If I notice a spot that doesn't get good coverage that I know is getting painted over, I might not make it a priority, but I would always just rather have nice coverage on everything. And you see how much more convenient it makes having everything on the sprues like this. It's much easier to do a bunch of them like this. You're not fumbling around, dropping tiny little shoulder pads. Everything is like lined straight up. And then when you go through and do like all the highlights and all the other paint on it too, it just makes it even better because everything is just set up for success. Spend a little extra time like in the preparation phase, and it pays dividends in the late game. Well, it's really not late game yet, but later stages. So, but you see too, using a nice fat brush, it holds a lot more of the wash on there. But you do have to make sure you go back and pull up any like excessive pools, or you're gonna get like a real dark area where you have like too much drying in one spot. And same with Nuln Oil as well. I mean, it'll dry like full on black if you get too much collecting in one area. And obviously gravity will be a factor in that, so pay attention when you set stuff down, when you want it to dry, especially when you're doing washes, how you want the wash to interact with gravity. Like, do you want it to be up and down like this so the wash flows downwards? Do you want it to be laying down like this so the wash flows like downward in a different sense? Because that's all relative. I want it to be the way it's going to be on the model. So that's why I like to leave them on like the little display racks like this. It's going to ensure everything is according to how it's going to end up on the model basically. There might be like a slight angle on one of the shoulder pads or something, so it's not a 90-degree angle like from the ground or whatever, but that can be taken into account by one of the model's weapons being angled or something like that, so his actual arm is at an angle. So again, you can account for all that stuff. Most important thing, just be relative. But as you can see, if you use a nice big brush like this, you can really go through them. But you need to make sure too, when you're doing this, that you're not that you're getting like nice coverage with the wash, and you're not like trying to like save wash or anything. You need to make sure that in order for these washes to like function properly, that you have like a complete surface coverage of the area you want, and then like that oil that's in the wash and that coverage of the entire surface that you want to interact is what allows the wash to like settle correctly. if you don't correctly like cover everything, it's not going to settle correctly. Or if you try to water it down to make it like go further, you know, it doesn't have like the correct properties. It loses like the oily properties that it has, and then like you end up with like areas where the wash doesn't get like a good coverage, or there's like what looks like air bubbles when it dries. So by making sure you get a nice coverage and then removing excess, you avoid that issue. And it's very easy with like, you know, you don't even need a expensive brush or anything like that. You just need to have like a good brush. Like for instance, this is just some cheapo little brush, but it has nice bristles on it. I believe these are like boar head bristles or something like that. But I mean, this is just a super cheap brush that you can get. There's no excuse not to use something like this. It has very soft bristles, and it's a number 6. So as you can see, you know, with a wash or something like that, you don't want to have like some tiny little brush. You want something that holds a ton of wash, so you can save yourself having to dip your brush every 2 seconds. And it gives you the ability to just soak the wash back up onto there and then spread it how you need to. As where with the little brush, it just can't hold that much moisture. And you don't want to leave too much of this on here. It's going to give like too dark of a final look. So you do want to pay attention to how it's looking when it starts drying, and then pull it away and use it on the next one. Or you can even like put it back in the pot if you need to. But the most important thing is just to get that good coverage and let the wash do its own thing. Let the oil spread it out and go down in the recesses, let gravity take hold of it, and that's how you're going to get the best like final product look. I'm gonna actually start with the back of the heads here. The reason I do that is, and I do like when I prime models too, I like start with them upside down, like facing downwards. The reason I do that is that way when you flip them over and then like you go to paint them later and they're facing upwards, the area that hasn't been painted is the most important part. It's like their face and their top part, as where the area that's already been painted is their bottom. So it doesn't matter if like it gets scratched up a little bit or gets a little excess paint from the surface that you're painting on top of. As where if you like paint your models right side up like this and just spray them, and then you go to paint the underside, you're like laying down the freshly painted like most important part of your model while you paint like the underside like bottom of it. Doesn't make sense. So you do it the other way around. And that's just something you pick up over like, you know, years of painting. It's just like a little trick of the trade. And it's the same thing with this. If I want the wash to settle a certain way on their faces and I want to make sure their faces look right, I don't want to do all that process and go through all the work and then like paint the backs of the heads and the excess wash like brushes over onto their faces and messes it up. I want to do it the other way around. I'll start with their backs of their heads, get the coverage I need, and then now I can come back in and make sure the faces look good. And then if there's like a little bit of like oversplash or whatever on the wash, it's going to be on the back of the head, but I'll know when I set this down when I'm done that the face looks good. And again, it's just like a little trick of the trade to save you work later on. And stuff like that is going to save you a touch-up later, and every little touch-up you don't have to do later is just one step. So instead of having to touch up like, you know, 30 dudes, I might have to touch up like 4 or 5. And that's the key. The key is like when you get done and you only have a couple little touch-ups to do versus like a couple little touch-ups to do on every model. But if you just touch up after like every stage, you might end up touching up stuff that gets painted over multiple times. So if you have an idea what gets painted what color and in what order, etc., you can have a better idea as to what needs to remain a certain color, what's top priority not to get like overspill or whatever on. If something's not going to get painted again, you just avoid that one spot. But if everything else is going to get painted again around it, you don't have to worry about being like as meticulous with that one thing. And same deal when it's done, you just want to go through and make sure there's no little air bubbles, and then just pull out any excess amount of wash. And I just do that by like tilting the brush away, and then you can just scrape it off into the little top of the paint pot, And that way, you know, it's not going to dry like too dark and too thick. Yeah, they look good. And same thing, we're just going to start with the backs of the head. And this is a really nice brush, and I got like a whole set of them for a couple dollars. I mean, it was crazy. It's just one of those like online, I believe it was Amazon orders. And you just get like literally like a 1 through 8 set, and it was like, I don't even know, $4 or $5 for the whole set. So every brush ends up being like less than $1. I'm actually not sure which set this is because we ordered a bunch of just random ones. Sometimes you're just not sure what kind of quality you're going to get on them, especially with like a brush. But I mean, you can use for a lot of stuff. I use a nice brush for like important details and stuff like that, but for a lot of stuff I just use like throwaway brushes. That way you can be a little more like reckless with a brush if you know it's like disposable after so many models or whatever, after so many colors, especially with metallics, just because they tend to just ruin the brushes completely if you're not non-stop just cleaning it the entire time you're painting. So I find it's just better to use like an old brush of good quality or just a cheap new brush when you're doing metallics, and then you don't have to worry about did you ruin it. You just assume it's going to get ruined. And I mean, most brushes are only going to survive so long for like rougher stuff. If you're just painting like eyes with a brush, you can get it to last for a long time because you're not really using it that much. But you know, your little go-to brush that you're using for everything, don't expect that to last long if you're painting, you know, any substantial amount of models. But if you break down the cost of a brush by the amount of models you use that brush on, it's really not that much. You know, if you paint 20 models, what's $1 a model for a nice brush? If you get 20 models use out of it, it's nothing. So, you know, if it's 10 cents a model, you're killing it. How nice that gold is, yeah. So yeah, we're just going to keep going through and knock these out. Alright, so we pretty well went through everything and hit it with the Reikland Fleshade. Some of the like larger flat panels will need like another coat and some cleanup, but the majority of that's going to get taken care of when we dry brush back on our Retributor Armour gold highlights. But essentially we've got everything. The main thing here is to just make sure that we get the Reikland Fleshade down in all the cracks and basically get it down like in all the little grooves to darken everything up and give the gold like some serious depth. And then we'll go back through with that same gold again, do the dry brush, and that's going to really like bring it back to life. We'll do like a zenithal kind of dry brush focusing on like the top front of everything, and then we can kind of go from there. We'll do like one more lighter dry brush, and then we can move on to our like silver highlights and everything. But right now the gold is looking nice. We need to give everything plenty of time to dry. It does take quite a while to get all the washes down in the recesses and everything, but you can already see how much it really gives like another dimension to the gold itself. And then when we come back in with the dry brush and brighten everything back up is when you really start to get like the depth out of it. So making good progress. Definitely takes quite a bit of time to do like you know, a large step like this on a whole army, but you know, each step takes progressively like less time as you go because you're doing less and less work on each model. So most important thing is to just stay consistent throughout the army. Make sure that you let like the washes really do their work and that you use like adequate amount of it, and then wick away any excess that you have. So next we'll do is let everything dry for a little bit, and then we'll just start on the things that we started first, and we'll go back through and dry brush in our Retributor Armour gold. So there you have it, guys. We're going to keep on keeping on, and we'll be back with you a short update. Alright, so we're making real nice progress, and we're back to the beginning now, to the initial infantry, and we're going to use our Retributor Armour now, and we're going to go through and dry brush on some highlights, and that will just kind of like bring the gold back to its brightness And we're going to do it in sort of like a zenithal highlight type of way. And what I mean by that is we're going to focus primarily on the areas that would get hit by like the sun, like the brightest areas. So like, you know, the top and the face, etc. So I'm going to take our shoulder pad sprue here first, and we want to get like the majority of the paint off. And then we're just going to basically pick our top of our shoulder pads and just kind of do like a downward motion on them. And we're just sort of wanting like the paint to catch the edges. And all that's going to do is just kind of bring the brightness back up and give it like just a little bit more of the like golden sheen. And then you'll see down in the cracks where the wash has settled, and like the shadowy areas will appear like darker now, and you'll have like more of a contrast. So and then same thing, we'll just get a little bit back on our brush. And it's always better if you do like a little less at first and then progressively brighten them up. Then you just have like entirely too much paint on your brush, and you know, just glop up all the detail, and ruin all the hard work that you put in. But you can already see with just a nice controlled dry brush how much nicer that gold looks than just in the initial steps, but especially after you wash it and then come back in. It's when you're really going to see the difference. And you see how I kind of shifted to get the different angles and areas, and I'm just doing that basically to make sure that I get the spots like from all angles. And same thing here. You don't want to go too crazy on them, but you want to brighten them up so they kind of catch your eye. But the main goal here is to just have a nice contrast in the gold. It gives it what I would refer to as like a nice depth. And especially at like the bottom, when you have them mounted up like this and you allow the wash to settle with gravity, you'll notice it's like darker at the bottoms, and then when you do the dry brush, the gold on the bottom where the eagle is like stands out exponentially more. And then same with like the little details. So now if you were going to go back and pick those out in silver, depending on like what paint job you're going to do, it would be less relevant. But in this case, when we're not planning on it, gives a nice effect. And same thing with the faces. Just going to make sure this is like ideally where you want some of the brightest like highlighting on your model. You want the brightest part to be the face, because it'll then draw your attention to it. And I think that's a common mistake people do. Like, you know, they'll have their toes highlighted the same color as a model's face, and in all reality it shouldn't be like that. The brightest part of the model should be like the very top of it. And then you also want to brighten up the face specifically, because that's where you want to draw like, you know, the attention of whoever's looking at your model. Alright, so here we are now. We went through and did our next dry brush of the gold, and it's really tough to pick up on video, but now you can really see like the different levels of gold that we have. Like, we focus the highlights from the top down, and that's going to give it like a lot more of like a directional highlight, in the same way that like the sun would. But it really helps like each model to really stand out, and then gives it like a certain like depth to it, as opposed to like the flatter gold. If you don't, now some people like to use silver on top of it as like a final highlight. Some people don't like how it looks on gold. That's why I specifically like to use the Auric armor gold and stormhost silver like mix. Basically you get like the combination of the two effects without feeling like the silver kind of dulls the gold down. So we're just going to go through and finish up everything else. I still have like all the accessories and the jet bikes and everything to do this coat on as well, but we're making some nice progress. So alright, so here we are, a little over 14 hours in, and the gold is done on everything. It is complete. It looks great layered on here and everything. It's very difficult to pick up in the camera like the absolute like detail and like layers that it gets to it, but having almost like that reddish purple from the Reikland flesh down in like the cracks all the way up to like the brightness of the most intense gold just really makes it just absolute striking, and it just really accents like the shadows and everything. And as we add in the other colors, it's really gonna just jump out and accentuate like the amount of detail and time that we put into the process so far. So from here on out, we're gonna start doing adding in some of the other details and working on the basing as well. At 14 hours, I say we're doing pretty good to be done with the gold right here. We're gonna come in with the black templar contrast paint, and essentially what we're looking to do on this is I'm doing dread host for these models. So we're gonna basically be going in and doing we're gonna be doing like this little portion of the shoulder pads right in here, those little bits, and then also gonna be going on like the backs of their like legs and doing like the little joint areas and like in their little hip joints and all those little spots. Now also the weapons, like the main portion of the weapon, I'm gonna do all the weapons with the black, and then I'll come back and do like the silver over top of it. I don't like to do the silver right over the gold because it doesn't get like perfect coverage, but that's just personal preference really. But as you can see, we're making nice progress, so make sure you shake these things up really well. I already shook this one before I started the video. This particular army is going to have red for the plumes and cloaks with white on the inside, and then like I said, it's going to have you know, all the little black in the backs here and everything. And one nice thing about the contrast paints is they do flow very well right out of the pot. You don't have to mess with them, and once you get like your brush like adequately saturated and everything, they spread very nicely and get right down in the cracks and everything, but also give you like the full effect of like the paint and highlight in one, or the paint and wash I should say, I guess, in one. There you can see we're just going through and knocking out all those little bits. And if you just paint your lines with this, the brush just does what it wants to do right along with it. You're not fighting it. As where if you try to go at like a 90-degree angle, you're fighting the little ridges, and then like you end up like spraying paint. As where this way you get like that nice coverage. So it's a lot to do, but we're gonna do that for all the guys all over. Alright, so we made it to 16 hours in, 2/3 of the way, and all the gold and highlights and everything are finished, and we're just going through right now and just doing all the black parts. In this case, it's gonna be like the main weapons, and then like all the little creases in the armor, all the little soft spots, and then our shoulder pads. Instead of like your typical like custodian red, is gonna be they're gonna be all done in black. And then it's gonna be all red for like the cloth. But overall, everything's coming along nicely. You can really see now, you know, on the tank, how much that gold is really like smoothed out and everything. And I didn't worry about like the splotchiness on like these panels because they're gonna get painted over. But on the actual like finished portion of it, you can see how nice the gold looks and everything, and it really catches the angles in a nice way. Another really good example is on our jet bike conversion. It has so many sharp edges that just really pick up all the cool gold. This new light is so bright though, it's hard to pick up like the metallics and also like whites and stuff like that because they basically just glow, but you can really see on the turret. And then as soon as we start adding in like additional colors is when we when everything really starts to stand out and the details start to really pop. Like as soon as I did like the black on these guys, it just kind of like takes away like the monotony of all that gold, and then it starts to give it like a little bit more. And then as you add in like each additional color, it's gonna fill them out a little more. So but there we have it, basically 2/3 of the way in. I think overall we're pretty well on target. I don't know if we're gonna be finishing you know, in the estimated time, but we'll see how everything progresses as we go. There's still tons and tons of little details and everything. Still a decent amount of black to do over all the weapons, and then there's going to be like some other black details as well. So we keep grinding on it, and go ahead and keep you guys updated. Warhammer Man Studios, and I'm out of here.